apartheid, in protesting inequality, and in fighting for justice. Oliver Thomas, former city councilman at large. Oh, y'all can give it a little better for Oliver Thomas.
He started Kwanzaa in our city. Kalamu, yes. Started Kwanzaa, practice of Kwanzaa.
You are welcome to come up and school me. Oliver is famous and somewhat infamous, but he is known for fighting for equality for women and for justice through our political system. Bob Jerome Smith,
And
one of our most glorious freedom fighters, who played a critical role in fighting segregation, in fighting inequality, in demanding opportunities for young Black children at times when the situation was bleak and is bleak. He continues to fight for justice on the streets of New Orleans. And so we really want to thank these three. And with no further ado, the history of Black resistance in New Orleans.
we have Dodie Simmons, who was also one of the original freedom riders. Dodie right here. Dodie Simmons. Come tell us.
Would you honor us by joining the panel?
Yes.
Drink up this testosterone.
We need a strong female up there. Here, I got
Dodie, a lot of people don't know.
Stay back there.
Sabrina, will you introduce us, Dodie?
I met, oh God. And you know what was really, as a child, I was one of Big Ducklings with Matt Suarez. I lived next to the Matt. Oliver and I went to school together. Kalamu, I always saw him as a very revolutionary person through his words. And I met Dodie really through McDonough 15, but now realizing that as a child living next door to Fluky, she was always, that's where the Corps would have their meetings, H. Rat Brown and Stokely Carmichael. So Jerome has always been my mentor, and Fluky. And but I'm just, this is an awesome gathering, and what I regret is that we're not taking this because, oh, you are? Oh, good. Because as Jerome says all the time, twilight time, you know, and there's a lot of history that's not being put into our schools anymore. And he made sure when we were kids that we got our history, and that it was the right history, it was the history of truth. So, peace and love to each of you.
I'm interested. Y'all, we've been introduced, but I believe we're family up in here right now, and we got time. So everybody, just say your name and who you represent. And if you ain't representing no group, you can be representing yourself. If you're coming from a part of the city, you've been involved in something, you're doing something, or you wouldn't even be here. So, Connor?
No, but before we start the meeting,
There you go.
before we start the meeting, there's an article in a book I have in my bag. It's about 50 children that went to the original March on Washington. And they gathered in the back of the rotunda when others was not allowed, because they came out of that freedom struggle. With all that power there, the book said when they entered, they got the loudest applause. The loudest applause, other than Martin Luther King. All these kids came from Mississippi. Most of their parents could not read nor write. And there's some in here speak to the fact that the contributions we done made in to young people is wrapped in some lie as it relates to Dr. King and Malcolm X. in Montgomery, when these kids came down, before Mahalia Jackson suggested to Dr. King Martin the dream, she was in the midst of these children that came from our Freedom House, where Anna Moody wrote Coming to Age of Mississippi. She was in the midst of those children when she said, Martin needs to preach today. And in some ways, that linkage is what I developed at Hunter's Field in spite of negative songs. But this is not the reason I stood up. A black boy jumped the fence. And he got shot in the head. So that means that somebody planted and shot him in the head. They did not try to stop him. It's because America has this New Day lynching in time of us. Let's talk about that child. He jumped the fence. When I was a boy, I jumped the fence around the bayou off of Moore Street. It was stables there, but they had a China ball tree. And this China ball tree have little China balls, little green balls. The branches of the tree that went to the outside of the street, it wasn't the China balls we wanted. So we would climb up that tree. But one day, there was a branch of China balls. And I carried 2 pop gun cans. That's why we wanted the China balls. To put in our pop gun can to take and make war with each other with the China balls. That was part of our creativity. That's when we made our toys. That's when we made the skate trucks out of the old skates from Christmas. That was all part of our creativity. But that day, I fell in the yard. And this white fella came with a big stick, whatever. And being nimble, I was able to climb up the tree like a cat and get on the other side. I wanted the China balls. But this young black boy he wanted survival. See, he wanted survival. See, he did not have the cushions I had in terms of where I knew when my mother come home from work, she was going to read to me and tell me that they was not smarter than me. When she come out in white folks' house, she read to me every night. So this child was trying to survive. You know what the great sin is, black people? How many done sent that child a call and say you're not a throwaway? How many done said to this child that you are somebody, you have family, your people care for you? How can you celebrate Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and go to church if you don't understand the mission of the spiritualization that existed in us from the first black man that was kidnapped, brought here and called a slave, but didn't surrender? This child, this black child, this people has not thought enough to say, except at Tambourine and Bank. Where I come from the sea, speaking to some last week, I had mentioned to Oliver. We should have sent a card to the house. Simple care. This is church. Whether you're Muslim, whatever, Christian, whatever. You got to put yourself up from decently. He wanted to murder him. And this New Day assassination on us. So in this moment, I cannot speak about nothing unless I speak about the child, because I have this thing that's deep in me. They can bend this body, but they'll never kill the spirit. Never, ever. Because we don't touch. See, yesterday's tradition. I done sat with Malcolm, I done sat with King, I done sat with Martin Luther King, I done sat with so many, but they none mean nothing. Because my mother taught me they ain't had no haters when my daddy paid for my back. And I was so the thing becomes we owe that boy something. But he owe it life. But we come away because we jumped in the yard. Well, my goodness. Look what they did for Christ. Now when they gave Christ all that money to rescue that corporation, and look at all the cotton and stuff he picked for nothing. And we should take time when we deal with prayer. Prayer is not prescriptive utterance of some words that have been written. When you come out your mother's womb, you're in prayer. You're in prayer. You know, and I was taught by my father is that he asked me, where your boy see the cross? Father was a seaman. So where your boy see the cross? He had a church down a few times. What's his name? Clayman by Green Church, Baptist Church, Baptist Church, you know. So the deal is, he said, well, your head come out first. Your head come out first. If you open your arms up and the legs are there, your voicing is a spiritual witness to spirituality because you're born in holiness. You are that. Okay? And that's what it makes. There is a child so many times we separate ourselves from the spiritual determination caused by the secular existence that allow us to deny our own. If the child was white, somebody will be around that hospital tonight or at that house. Now, we allowed it. Now, we ain't going to deal with the legal thing yet, because we don't get there. But guess what? We ain't had nobody to say, I'm just a name. We ain't had nobody to say that judge made a dozen with us. And the judge said this white boy had a good family, but in essence, he said the black church that goes from him every day don't have good families. So that question is racial integrity. Those of us that's dark skin that have to face him every day. So the churches should be in an uproar. To know what? Most churches are afraid of all this guy in I'll go to jail tomorrow. And I've got not only I would be in jail, but everything I've been trying to organize for. So I just want to lay that there. You need to think about that service, that new boy.
Tracy and I in the morning, so we called for the judge's resignation. No one else did. We thought he should resign. He actually, there are no RORs or releases. I know I couldn't be released like that. There are no RORs or releases for crimes of violence. So I don't know why no one else focused on that. But that's the law. But in this country, there's two sets of justice. And there's two different types of value. Some people make a mistake. Other people are the mistake. If you make a mistake, then you can be dealt with. If you are the mistake, you have to be eliminated. So that's just the history of this country. What I want to try to do is, if I can get our panelists, I've been, then I'm a moderator now too. If we could talk about some of the history of New Orleans, maybe starting with the 1811 slave revolt, where it came from the Place and said on to New Orleans. That was one of the first incidents of critical resistance, especially in this region.
What's previous to that?
Go ahead. So, what are some of the historical incidents of critical resistance, and then you guys kind of highlight each of those, and then
All right. The first one, there's a book, Mama Jennifer. They got The World That Made New Orleans here. You got a copy. Would you pass it this way? I want to read from page either 37 or 38 because it's very important. The reason it's important is they're about to unleash the great propaganda machine on our ass. Again. In 2018 is going to be the tricentennial of the founding of New Orleans. And when they do it, it's going to be like they're going to wrap Jesus, right? Absolutely. They're going to wrap Jesus up in it. thank the Lord, we're here, and we survived, and we've done well, and so forth and so on. And they're going to make you believe that everybody in the world is so glad that the French founded New Orleans. All right, now, I want to read this because some people, when I start talking some of this shit, people say, well, I'm mad here. I said, well, this ain't me. I'm quoting this white boy here. He says,
You gotta legitimize.
no, I'm not legitimizing.
You know what I mean.
Yeah, I'm not legitimizing.
I'm on your side.
I'm just letting you know where you can find some of the information in case you want the information. Let's see, page, that's before Marty. I'm gonna tell you while it is. Here's the basics of it. And as soon as I find it, I'll read it. The basic is Iberville and Bienville claimed to have founded New Orleans in 1718. They came here looking for the mouth of the Mississippi River. They wanted to control the river on behalf of France, right? When they were in an area known as Mobile, today known as Mobile, they hired some Native Americans to help them find where the river, exactly where the mouth of the river was. You're a longshoreman, you can relate to that.
Banana ham.
I'm just telling you the truth. This is where this man come from. He come off the docks. That's how he goes. Riverfront worker. Am I right?
A little bit.
A little bit.
I almost with the president of the local at 19. So
All right.
because my mama read to him every night.
Go ahead, Bilal.
So here's the deal. The Native American scouts told Iberville, and they kept a diary. It's written in Old French in their diary. You can go look it up. They say that over there, where y'all want to go, over there, they got black people living over there, and
Meaning New Orleans.
they won't talk to white people. And when white people come around, they run them off. We was here before there was a New Orleans.
That's resistance.
We was here before there was a New Orleans. Let everybody say that. We was here. I don't want to know we were. We was here before New Orleans. We was here before New Orleans. You got to understand that. You got to put that in your head. And people say, well, wait a minute. Kalama, how could that be? How could that be? Well, because Jamestown, 1619, is when the English first imported enslaved Africans.
Right.
But long before that,
That's
the
right.
Africans was already,
Right.
and the
From the
Spanish was
Caribbean.
bringing folks, and worse than that, the
Caribbean.
Spanish hated the English.
That's right.
And the Spanish said that if you can get to Florida, you can live free. If you can get to Florida, you can live free. Now, the people in Georgia and the Carolinas and Virginia, they didn't like that stuff. So we run to Florida. Now, Florida, as y'all know, Florida come damn near to Louisiana, right? So what we doing? We living where we living. We living in the areas where they ain't living.
That's right.
We living in the swamps, right? That's why we got gumbo. We can talk about that later. That's where gumbo comes from, but we'll talk about that later. But I just wanted to say, so the first resistance,
Yeah, there's another piece to that Florida piece.
we're going to come back to Florida. But I'm just saying, the people ran to Florida. There's a place called Fort Mosa, M-O-S-A. For close to 40-some years, we ran our own community in Florida. That's why Andrew Jackson was fighting the Seminole War so hard. They wanted, because the Seminoles wasn't nothing but black and red people working together.
That's right.
Okay? And so we were all along the Gulf Coast because we come out of West Africa. We know water. Tell them, man, we know water. We understand that. You know, we don't fully get it now. So we were here first before one pale face, as they call it, came to this place, we was here. That's the first resistance.
Let's speak about Florida a minute. I want to tie something into some of this Mardi Gras Indian people. My son, Taju, lost his life in a homicide-suicide. His great-grandmother, who lived to be about 107, was in the Everglades in Florida. She was classified as Indian, but her family and stuff had ran into the Everglades to escape something that was happening. Now, Taju ultimately became the little chief of the Yellow Poker Hunters. But in that family, that his mother, Cynthia, and her mother, on Mardi Gras Day, when you thought he had rouge on his face, that wasn't, the blood would come to the top of his skin. And there was times that he would connect to certain things that was very, very strange, but it was like pieces of something that came from that old lady. And when he would go down there to visit her or send her pictures of his costume, right, she would start crying, right? Because she said that thing that we were doing here in ways, and she had a broken language, is that was not, because they had lived with the American Indians, they had called them, but she said that was African. And she was telling him that the spirit that he was representing was an African. And there her family had been a part of the conflict down in Florida. And so when he grew up in the tribe with children and whoever, when he was about 11 years old, he was functioning like a man out of the spirit of that lady. And that all these mixtures was definitely down there. And they were saying that some sections of Florida, there was no whites until they came in war. And that's when some of the blacks went into the Everglades to live in the middle of it.
Okay, so here it is. I'm gonna just read it.
And then we're going to get down.
And then we're gonna get to Jody. Because Jody, whether y'all know it or not,
From a female's perspective.
Jody is the historian of the civil rights movement in New Orleans. Jody got names, dates, places, pictures, newspaper clippings, phone numbers. She's gonna tell you about the phone number she got. You know what I'm talking about. But anyway, wait till you hear that story about this phone number. Y'all ain't heard nothing like this before. This ain't on CNN. Here it is now. He says, when these first French-speaking colonialists, he's talking about Iberville and Bienville, arrived, there were already free blacks in the area. Now this ain't Kalamu, you know, because Kalamu would have said it different. But this, I'm reading out of a book that research and all that. And he got hold of the journals that was written in the Old French. So this is what they. Iberville learned from a native informant of the existence of a community of black Spanish-speaking Cimarrones, or Maroons, which means runaways, some 10 days travel to the west-northwest. So if you're in Mobile, you go around and come up. And quote, this is a quote, this is Iberville. At this settlement, there were only Negroes with their families, right? The Indian informant reports them to be rather numerous and leads us to believe that the Negroes at this settlement did not welcome any white Spaniard. And when white ones came, the blacks drove them off without speaking to them. Sound like the Indians.
I really didn't come prepared.
You're always prepared.
Make the phone call. Tell them about the phone number. Tell them about the phone number.
I read about this event today in the Times-Picayune, and tonight at KIPP Central City School, the mayor and the city council honored the Freedom Riders as a part of the 50th anniversary on the March on Washington, which several of the core members were there. Now, Kalamu talked about a phone number. I have to tell you the story.
Pull out your handkerchief, you're gonna cry. You're gonna be waving them.
In 1961, after the Freedom Ride and the passage of the ICC ruling that outlawed segregation, not only on the bus, but in the terminal, restroom, restaurants, and so forth, we, New Orleans Corps, decided to do testing in Mississippi and Louisiana. On one trip, I think it was November the 8th, we did a testing in Poplarville, Mississippi, and Hattiesburg. In Hattiesburg, we encountered no problem. In Poplarville, there's not a terminal, but a little shack. There was a grocery store. You could buy your bus ticket there. The bus parked on the other side of the street by the gas station. When we did testing, we did it in test teams of 2 with an observer. The testers in Poplarville was Alice Thompson and Patricia Smith, no relation to me or to Jerome. And they were immediately arrested. Frank Nelson, a white freedom rider from New York who had just gotten out of jail in Mississippi and decided to stay in New Orleans to work with Corps, was the observer. He got off to find out what was happening, and he was also arrested. They were placed in jail, and the jailer told the 2 females, Alice and Pat, that they were in the same cell that Matt Charles Parker, 2 years previously, had been drugged from, hanged, and his body thrown in the river. And the jailer was saying, yes, we would gather at the river. So the 2 females would sing freedom songs. So that was one placement. On November 29, 1961, we decided to go, or Jerome decided to go, to Macomb, Mississippi.
Well, on Macomb, Mississippi, there's a movie called Freedom Song. And in that movie, this is why you cannot believe these stories about the Freedom Ride. They said that no one would go into Macomb, Mississippi.
They went.
The only group to go there and confront them was New Orleans Corps.
All right.
See, that's not spelled out, and some folks that's telling the story about the Freedom Ride, they're not saying that. Nobody in this country, don't care what organization stood up the way we did. None. We went in every place, and everywhere we went, we made a significant contribution over and over again with no cameras. That's another kind of demonstration when there's no cameras there. And you have to enter the spirit of freedom.
So we're getting to the phone number now. Come on.
So, like I said, on November 29, 1961, we took a bus from New Orleans and went into Macomb, Mississippi. When we got there, the terminal was closed. So we went over to the black community. Around lunchtime, we went back to the terminal. We walked in. Jerome was the observer. Alice Thompson, George Raymond, Thomas Valentine, and myself went and sat at the lunch counter. Jerome went to the ticket counter to purchase return tickets. George Raymond said to the waitress, "May I have a cup of coffee, please?" and the waitress ignored him. He again said, "May I please have a cup of coffee?" At that point, some young white poured a cup of hot coffee, walked behind George Raymond, poured the coffee over him, and hit him in the base of the neck with the coffee cup. At that point, Jerome motioned for Alice and I to come into the waiting area. Then they realized that Jerome was a part of the group. And at that point, all hell broke out. There was a couple of guys started beating on Jerome. One guy had brass knuckles. And music was always a part of the movement. It made you strong. And for some reason, I always took notes. I had a little pad and always took notes of what was going on. So I'm writing down that the guys are being beaten. Alice and I sitting there helpless. And Jerome is being beaten. And George Raymond's being chased around. He's jumping over this lunch counter with a petition from here to there, and they chase him. He jumped back over. Tom Valentine, who's a little slight guy, took him off of the stool and threw him down on the ground, and he would bounce up like that, and they would grab him and throw him down again. Jerome is taking the worst